These are 3 powerful lessons I've learned in order to become a better person by leveling up and working the land. It may sound totally counterintuitive, but during 2021, my family and I, so me, my husband, and our 2 sons, decided to start volunteering at a retreat center. We volunteered every Saturday, and this act of giving was one of the most powerful experiences that we had in the entire year. 2020 and 2021 has been tough years for all of us. I was at that time going through the worst of my major depressive disorder, my depression. We were parenting 3 children through the lockdowns where we couldn't even go to the parks. Like, the parks were fenced off. I was also taking care of my aging parents with health complications and still trying to work through that. So a lot of the times, like 2020, we would work after the kids sleep. So we'd be working from like 10 p.m. until 4 or 5 a.m. every single day. I only put eyelid tape on one side because I was diagnosed with ptosis, where the eyelid muscle is malfunctioning, and I can only open my eye if I lift my eyebrows. So I actually have more blurry vision on this side. In the thick of all of the overwhelming work and work-life balance, it really wouldn't have made sense for us to give up an extra whole day with no tangible, real beneficial reason. Obviously, it would take up our time, our energy, and just in general, we would be losing our Saturdays. Lose in quotation marks, because in the end, everything is equivalent exchange. And we always trade something for something else. There's a bit of a long story to how we actually got started volunteering there, but long story short is that a family friend gave us a prophetic calling to go help an elderly couple in their ministry running a retreat center, and this was shortly before he passed away. A couple were in their 80s and they were still doing a lot of their land work by hand. So they were having problems with the stamina and just the hard labor of everything, and collapsing while taking down trees and things like that. We could have just easily thought that it would be too much for us and move on, ignore it, doubt it, or second guess and just not really want to bother with all of that. But sometimes when you receive a call or when you have that gut feeling, you have to take action. We wanted to trust God and obey immediately, and it was really about trusting the process because we really didn't know what to expect, but that became a life-changing experience for us. One of the very first things I learned was that you have to cut off every last strand of toxicity in your life. Like, every last strand. We were removing bramble and bush with scythes while cutting down trees and a lot of weeds on a hill. But I would grab the weeds and then scythe them, but I cannot get rid of the chopped weeds until the very last strand in the entire bundle was cut, which means that I would not have been able to let go of all of those other weeds if the very last one wasn't cut. I also noticed that there were a lot of dead branches at the bottom of the bramble and bush, just like lying there, just dead. And even though they're dead, I realized that they wouldn't go away unless we actually went in there and manually removed them. So we did have to grab a bunch of the dead branches and move them to an area separate to decay. We had to spend 2 entire days just to clean up this entire area, and there were 7 pairs of hands. So it was something that I learned that you need more people, you need a community to really be able to cut off all the toxic strands in your life and really allow for the path, a clear path to show. Galahad also hurt his eye in the process. One of the weed stems poked his eyelid. It was completely fine, but we did learn that, there may be injury along the way. We used different types of tools for different weeds. So some of the bramble and bush required like scissor tools, and then some we could just chop it with the scythe. Some we would need axes to just like boom, boom, boom. And then we also needed an electric saw for those really thick bushes that like literally grew like trees, but they were weeds. A second important lesson that I learned was that we have to really weed out a lot of bad habits, small little problems that we think wouldn't really have issues, especially not issues at the moment. And even this is a community effort. There's a little garden area that we helped fence up in a previous weekend. And by the time this day came, we did have to weed out a lot of small little weeds that were growing in between the crop. The soil was actually softer from the day before because it had rained. So sometimes you do need some extra help before you actually weed, and it needs to be in the perfect condition in order to get the roots of the weeds out. And some of the weeds were really interesting because it looked so small, but the roots were very deep. And if the ground had been dry, then those roots would have snapped off and you wouldn't have gotten more than half of the plant out. We did have a team of 5 weeding, but we only got half of the gardens done in one of the visits. So again, it took a lot of time and community, but we also noticed that the weeds themselves have a community where they're interconnected and they're in between the crops. They're so small, but they're so deep. It is definitely not a one-day job, but it is something extremely necessary. So you do have to weed people, habits, sins, you can say, even bad choices, relationships. And it takes a collective effort and many people in a group. And many times when it looks like it's not a big deal, the roots may actually be quite deep. And sometimes you need to do it right after a storm, right after a rainfall, when we think something came bad, but the rain actually becomes a blessing because it helps us to remove these weeds. I had several friends that I did have to let go, and I was really sad, but going through the weeding process on the land really gave me a lot of insight to what I needed to do, because all these signs were really telling me that it was necessary. That was a rotten relationship. It was eating at me and it was dead. It was not real. And this was the hardest relationship for me to cut off. But what definitely made it easier was realizing that it was truly all a lie, and I was loving these fake personas of these friends. The final lesson that I learned was that growth takes time. We made wine with grapes that they grew in their little mini grapevine. Even with that process, you have to take it step by step. And in the end, it is a 10-year wait. We separated the rotten grapes from the fresh grapes and also had to remove a lot of bugs from the grapes. We literally manually did one grape at a time. And even after sorting, we did have to wash the grapes 2 times to get rid of further dirt, more bugs, and also some dust and debris. Then we crushed all the grapes and removed the stems, then pulverized the grapes. The boys did help pick out more grapes, and the final grape juice was put into large gallon bins. That took a team effort and 10 years of waiting until the fine wine is made. I definitely learned so much more than I ever would have if I didn't volunteer. And it has improved my mental health, my well-being, the amount of wisdom that I'd have been learning from, now we call them our mentors. Literally so much wisdom, so much important learning that we've gained from this whole volunteer experience. To the point where prior to going volunteering, I was actually so depressed that I could not work. I could not bring myself to work. I was dreading every moment of my life. But because of the volunteering, what I would be learning in that moment with the ground what I'd be learning through their wisdom. It all gave me a work joy for working for the next week. Literally, I would be so full of joy. And I think that feeling of joy is so different from the feeling of just happiness, where I feel meaning in my life and I'm able to understand my purpose. And that, you can't put a price on that. That is untradeably, unpricelessably a blessing. Thank you so much for walking with me on this continual journey to keep focusing on my health, growing myself, and I really encourage you to look for these opportunities. Even when you think it might not be beneficial, you may end up gaining something that you would never be able to trade. In the meantime, check out this video that YouTube recommends you to watch next, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. We'll cut me out and then put behind me like one shot of volunteer. Yeah. Thank you. Love you.